All right. Good evening. This is Scott Sanders. Welcome, everyone. City Manager here in Des Moines, and I want to welcome you to our budget discussion. We have a budget education and engagement webinar tonight. There is perhaps no topic more important to our residents, our businesses, and our neighborhoods than how it is that the city spends our tax dollars. We have an operating budget of over $180 million this fiscal year, and a capital improvement project budget of an additional $300 million. The responsibilities of these public dollars and how we spend them is our top priority here at the city. Over the course of the next hour or so, the city's finance director will join me, Nick Shaw, and we will talk through the Des Moines process for our budget, provide you some explanation as to how your property tax statement is calculated. We will review the local option sales tax and that performance. It has been in place for about 18 months. And we will show you the funding for each of the departments within the city. Nick will review some of the specific budgets items and the upcoming fiscal year. And throughout the evening, we will respond to questions that we've received from the public. Our website has asked for questions the last 2 weeks, so we have some of those prepared, and we hope to take some questions yet from tonight. For those of you that are connected with us on tonight's meeting, we ask that you would text in your questions via Zoom. We will answer as many of those questions as we have time for tonight, either during the presentation, and if we do not have time, we will answer those via online, so you can check those answers out as well. We are recording this meeting on Zoom, and that recording will be available to the public on the city's website and our YouTube channel. If you have any questions over the coming days or even weeks about the city's budget process, please go to our website, and that is at dsm.city/budget. Again, dsm.city/budget. In a moment, we'll take one of those first questions. But first, I want to share a message from our mayor, Frank County, on the historic year that has been presented to us, 2020.
Welcome and thank you for joining the city's budget, education, and engagement presentation. As we look forward to the next year, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the challenges and successes that we've seen this year at the City of Des Moines. This past year has brought our community challenges like never before. At the beginning of March, Iowa saw its first cases of COVID-19 and has changed the way we live our lives ever since. As of December 15th, Polk County has seen 37,634 cases. In my 17 years as mayor, I could have never imagined a crisis as devastating as this virus and how our community would be impacted. As challenging as this time has been, I am proud of how Des Moines community has come together in an effort to mitigate this virus and keep our community safe by wearing masks, staying home, social distancing. To respond to the virus, the city instituted a mask mandate in the city of Des Moines to reduce the spread of the virus, which I believe has helped keep our positivity rates down. We created a small business grant program in which the city provided $1.1 million to 142 small businesses in Des Moines to assist them as they try to survive lost revenues due to the virus. We worked with local restaurants to provide over 53,000 free meals over the summer throughout our community, which kept both restaurants and businesses and fed families that were most impacted by the virus. We also allocated over $684,000 to assist residents with rent relief and $330,000 for homeless prevention. These are just a few of our efforts in a response to the virus. And we know we still have a long way to go until COVID-19 crisis is over. Des Moines also saw another unexpected challenge this summer when a derecho, which is a series of intense straight-line thunderstorms, ripped through central Iowa, bringing sustained winds of 70 miles per hour and peak winds of up to 110 miles per hour. Some wind speeds in this region actually reached the levels equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane. This unusual weather event devastated homes and left residents without power for days, and the city removed over 9,000 truckloads of debris scattered across Des Moines. Despite these challenges, the city has continued to move forward. We are happy to share that despite the financial toll of COVID-19 pandemic, the local option sales tax has exceeded revenue expectations for fiscal year 2020. We are continuing to use these funds to work towards the objectives that our community identified as a priority for the local option funds. We've lowered our tax levy by 60 cents, and we are continuing our efforts towards infrastructure upgrades, whether that's street improvements or stormwater upgrades, public safety enhancements, and neighborhood improvements. This past year, the city made progress on significant projects for the community. We finalized the Market District Development Plan, which is a proposal for 39 acres of construction on 11 blocks over the next 10 years. This district will revitalize existing, underutilized, or brownfield land to create a new destination urban neighborhood. With that revenue from our local option sales tax, the city has also been able to make significant road improvements, such as the Martin Luther King Jr. Parkway rehabilitation, to repair aging infrastructure. I am proud of the work done on projects like these, and much more that make the city of Des Moines a great place to live. As we look ahead to next year, we are committed to continuing the efforts we've set forward to improve our community, such as continuing our Blitz on Blight program to remove an ambitious 100 blighted properties throughout our neighborhoods per year, seeing the completion of Fire Station 11 on the northeast side of Des Moines, and working on essential infrastructure improvements. I'm proud of the achievements our community has made this year, despite the challenges we faced, and I'm looking forward to continuing our work in 2021.
Thank you, Mayor County. As part of the mayor's message, he talked about the challenges that we've had through 2020, especially dealing with COVID-19 pandemic. And that's probably a good place to start with impacts on our budget. This week, in fact, just a couple of days ago, the Congress passed a $900 billion COVID relief package. It did not, however, include funds that would go directly to local and state governments. A member of our media just asked earlier today about the impacts to our city budget from the COVID lost revenues. And it is disappointing that the financial support was not provided directly to state and local governments. We were hoping that there would be an allocation of the funds that would reach Des Moines and other cities across Iowa that are suffering due to COVID losses. We, however, do have planning in place. We have very conservative spending policies, and we have strong reserves. So like I've said before, we are looking at doing some delaying and curtailing of short-term and some long-term capital projects. Our estimates do expect an easing of this revenue loss due to COVID-19 into the next fiscal year, as we see businesses return to more of a normal activities. Before we go any further though, let's go back to some questions. I've got one here from Jean O'Donnell, who lives in our 3rd Ward, and she writes, I would like the budget webinar to describe the annual budget process from beginning to end with a timeline and specific references to where the public can be involved in the process. Also, who do we reach out to get questions answered about specific items within the budget? Well, these are great questions, Jean. We have 2 videos that we've prepared that should provide some insight to your questions. The first video details our annual budget process, while the second one will address the annual property tax bill.
Here's a brief overview of the City of Des Moines' annual budget process. The City Council based their strategic priorities on Plan DSM and Guide DSM and communicates with the City Manager. The City Manager instructs the department directors whether any changes in city services can be factored into the next budget process. Starting in late July, the Finance Department updates its projections based on each department's expenditure history individual project costs, inflation factors, revenues, and salaries. Through January, the Finance Department works with each department and the City Manager's Office to compile an operating budget and a capital improvement program budget. In February, City Council holds a single workshop devoted to discussing a variety of budget topics for the upcoming fiscal year. In February and March, the City Council holds public hearings to set a cap on property tax revenue, discuss the proposed budgets, and adopt the final budgets. The state of Iowa requires 1-year budget to be adopted and submitted by March 31st of each year. The city's budgets can be found on the city's website at dsm.city. To make sure the city is being good stewards of public funds, the Finance Department starts working in July on the Comprehensive Financial Report. Through November, auditors complete an independent, objective evaluation of the city's financial reports and processes for regulators, investors, directors, and managers. In December, the audit is completed and published, and for more than 40 consecutive years, the city has been awarded a Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. In January, auditors meet with City Council to discuss the results of the audit and provide assurance that the city financial statements are accurate and complete. Review the city's comprehensive annual financial report and audit results on the city's website at dsm.city.
Do you have a question about your property tax statement? Well, you're not alone. Every year, we hear from Des Moines homeowners about their property taxes and why things add up the way they do. It can be more than a little confusing, so we wanted to provide a clear understanding of how it comes together. If you think of your annual property tax bill as a pie chart, you'll see it's made up of many slices or tax rates. Des Moines Public School District, City of Des Moines, Polk County, Broadlawns Medical Center, and a category called Other, which includes things like DART, DMAC, and the state of Iowa. Now, thanks to the local option sales tax that went into effect in July of 2019, the City of Des Moines, as promised, reduced its tax rate 2 straight years. While that's good news, it's still not the entire story, because the City of Des Moines makes up only about 1/3 of this equation. So your combined tax rate from year to year might not reflect the tax decrease you got from the city. Why's that? Well, it's because other slices or factors in your tax pie had a bigger impact on your statement and outweighed the city's property tax cuts. Now, it could be those other slices increased their rates, or there was an increase in the annual state percentage that determines the taxable value of your house, or simply your Polk County property tax assessment went up. All factors that go into your property taxes, which the City of Des Moines cannot control. Again, Des Moines accounts for only 1/3 of it, and over the past couple of years, our portion of your statement has gone down. We hope this provides a better understanding of what makes up your property taxes and demonstrates our commitment to being upfront about your important tax dollars.
Okay, at this point, I actually want to remind our viewers once again that all this information from tonight and all the additional budget information is available on our website at dsm.city/budget. So one of the elements that has had a very positive effect on our budgeting process is the local options service tax that voters passed overwhelmingly early in 2019. So again, we've had that in effect for about 18 months. But it was only 2 days after that vote that the City Council acted as promised and lowered our city's tax rate. Without question, the local option revenue has been a boost to our city budget. Significant spending in areas of property tax relief, street improvements, stormwater upgrades, enhancement to public safety, and foremost, investments in our neighborhoods. The local option has provided helpful needs. It's been very helpful this year because of the revenue losses that we have sustained due to COVID-19. This next video is a great review of the local option sales tax and how it has made great budget sense for the City of Des Moines.
In March 2019, voters overwhelmingly approved a 1-cent local option sales and service tax to be used for property tax relief, infrastructure upgrades, public safety enhancements, and neighborhood improvements. The first year of numbers are in, and the local option sales tax exceeded expectations in fiscal year 2020, despite the challenges brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. A strong first 8 months of revenue helped the local option sales tax bring in over $38 million and minimize the impact of COVID-19 on fiscal year 2020 results. As required by state law, half of the funds raised by the local option was used to provide property tax relief in the form of a 60-cent levy rate reduction. The rest of the funds raised went to important street improvements and flood prevention projects across the city, neighborhood improvements like Blitz on Blight, special investment districts, and a property improvement program. Local option funds were also used to improve public safety through hiring of additional firefighters, as well as funding a mental health and mobile crisis program through the Des Moines Police Department. The financial reserve portion of the local option sales tax revenues is designed to guarantee that the city can continue to deliver on the priorities identified by local option voters. While we anticipate taking a hit on local option revenue for fiscal year 2021, reserves from this year will help protect the city's continued investment in the priorities that Des Moines residents have asked for. For more information on your local option sales tax, visit dsm.city/localoption.
All right. So moving along with questions, we did get a comment about the local option sales tax from Dawn Sawyer, and she writes, "The sidewalk project funded by sales tax should be delayed. This would free up monies for other essential needs of the city." That's a great question, Dawn, and thank you for your email. The sidewalks are an important project within the city of Des Moines, and this has been a 20-year initiative to fill 180 miles of sidewalk gaps in the city's neighborhoods, with a focus on the routes that the schools have identified, connections to bus stops and commercial nodes, improving accessibility accommodations, and providing connectivity for long sections of existing sidewalk. While the neighborhood sidewalk program is part of our MOVE DSM, and MOVE DSM is our transportation master plan, which aims to provide sustainable transportation options to all of our Des Moines residents. However, the program is not funded by our local option sales tax. It is funded by property taxes. Coincidentally, just last night, the City Council ordered construction of the next phase of our neighborhood sidewalk program. So I'm going to give our city engineer, Steve Neighbor, a chance to talk a little bit about our sidewalk programs here in Des Moines.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, absolutely. As Scott mentioned, MOVE DSM, the city's transportation master plan, it provides the framework in which the city hopes to achieve the goal of providing a transportation system that is safe for all users. That's motorists, pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit users. And so providing a complete street network, and that includes improving walkability and removing those barriers to walking. This is important for citizens with mobility restrictions, important to eliminate the hazards that if people choose to walk, along the street, or eliminate those gaps in the sidewalk network, and also achieve the goal of encouraging healthy lifestyles as walking for transportation. So I'm very proud that in just the first 2 phases of sidewalk programs, the city has added over 7.5 miles of sidewalks, new sidewalks throughout our city, and so to continue to achieve that goal of improving walkability all over the city. So.
Thank you, Steve. We'll get to some more of the questions and the comments in just a moment, but right now, I'd like to bring into the discussion our Finance Director, Nick Shaw. Nick is working hand in hand with our departments as we develop their budgets and build that up into our total general fund budget. Nick?
Thank you, Scott. As finance director for the city of Des Moines, I appreciate the opportunity to take part in this budget webinar. As residents and taxpayers, you have a right to know how the city dollars are being budgeted and why we're spending those. In a moment, I'm going to kind of go through more of a detailed PowerPoint presentation that kind of goes through some topics a lot more in depth and go into some of those questions. But first, there is an overview of how the departments are funded that I'm going to show you as the last video.
As a Des Moines resident, you have a right to know where your tax dollars go. So that's why we want to walk you through our budget process.
As you can see, the majority of the city's revenues come from property taxes. Other significant portions are fees and service charges, hotel and motel taxes, and franchise fees.
Like everyone, the city has been negatively affected by the coronavirus pandemic.
We have seen reduced revenues across the city in some of these key areas. The city is striving to maintain the same high level of service our residents expect by minimizing the impact to departmental operations.
The City Finance Department then uses these revenue sources to make up the City of Des Moines General Fund, which supports day-to-day operations of city services and departments, but does not finance capital long-term purchases or projects.
62% of the overall general fund budget was allocated to public safety, with 39% going to the Des Moines Police Department and 23% funding the fire department in fiscal year 2020.
This portion of the general fund was used to employ 372 sworn police officers and 283 sworn firefighters.
Des Moines police officers responded to over 204,000 police service calls in the year to keep our community safe. That's over 559 calls a day.
Meanwhile, the fire department responded to over 27,000 emergency calls over the year, and 70% of those calls are EMS runs involving life-threatening situations.
Administrative services support our city programs, services, and departments and account for 18% of the general fund budget.
The Parks and Recreation Department accounts for the next slice of the pie. The Parks Department was responsible for 7% of the general fund budget to oversee 4,000 acres of city land and its award-winning network of 75 city parks and 67 miles of trails.
The Des Moines Public Library System operates 6 branches and manages a catalog of 482,786 books and other digital resources with its 5% of the general fund.
Neighborhood Services accounts for another 5% of the general fund budget, which goes to supportive services relating to income and housing assistance and investment and implementation of improvements to Des Moines neighborhoods.
3% of the Des Moines General Fund budget goes to the engineering department to design and manage construction projects, as well as maintaining critical city infrastructure that keeps our city traffic moving.
Roughly 1% of the general fund budget finances the Civil and Human Rights Department that maximizes its budget to advance justice, promote equality, and ensure the protection of human rights for all people in Des Moines.
This department recently produced an Emmy Award-winning documentary about its education and outreach efforts.
The final portion of the general fund budget was about 1%, which covered administration of the Public Works Department, which was responsible for trash collection and keeping Des Moines roads and property safe and clean. The rest of the Public Works budget is financed by non-general fund revenues.
After watching this, we hope you have a better idea of how the City of Des Moines divides and utilizes its revenue sources to serve you and make Des Moines a better community every day.
Okay, that video kind of went through how the different departments are funded and kind of goes through that. I'm going to now kind of go through this PowerPoint presentation. Some of this information kind of was covered in the videos, and I'll kind of skim through that information. I just wanted to kind of get kind of all this type of information through this slideshow so that it can be referenced back, and it will be posted out on the website of dsm.city/budget for viewing later. The city finance education that we're trying to show here is we're going to kind of go through the budget schedule as it's going to lay out for the fiscal year 22 budget process. I'm also going to talk about kind of fund structure and how that deals with the city finances and how we have to structure our finances so that we can follow Iowa code and make sure that we're following all the rules we have to do. Another part that I want to kind of brush over is that budget forecasting and process that we actually go through every year with the departments and city manager. I've got a little more information on the property taxes and kind of an example to kind of show what house values look like for fiscal year 21 and kind of have that breakout. I also have some detailed information on the local option where it actually has the dollar amounts of what we spent for fiscal year 2020, that first year of that local option sales tax coming in. And then an overall budget overview that kind of hits some of the where we spend our money on what, and kind of giving the different groups of funds as you'll learn through that fund structure. We'll give you some different information on those type of things that we are funding, not just in the general fund. So our budget schedule, as you can see, started on October 19th, 2020, where we went to the council workshop to discuss the budget timeline and got feedback from the council on making sure that they felt comfortable with the approach that we're going to do. And through that discussion with the council, we've had this webinar, as you can see, for today. We also had the informational videos that we've showed again tonight, just in case somebody wasn't able to see those up before this webinar. We released those, asked for questions and feedback, and we've addressed some of those, and we're collecting those that from this webinar as well at the time, and we will get to those questions throughout this presentation. Going forward, we will be next month, mid-January, we have plans to release the preliminary budget book and the CIP book that will be available for the council and citizens to review. Then we'll have the workshop, a day-long workshop at the beginning of February 3rd, where we will work with the council and go through in more detail the 2022 budget, because we are currently working on that with the city manager and the departments and direction from council. This next page kind of talks about those actions that have to be done at the council meeting level. Mid-January, the council will approve a notice of public hearing for the maximum property tax dollars. That's a new process that was set up starting last year with the state for transparency purposes. It kind of goes through and shows how much the maximum dollar property taxes the city can ask for when it actually goes through the final parts of the budget process. The city will then hold the public hearing on the max property tax dollar on February 8th. Then after that meeting on the 22nd of February, we'll approve the notice to go into the paper for the actual budget hearing on the operation and the CIP budgets. That hearing will actually be held on March 8th, 2021. Now, every year, like one of the videos said before, we have to have that annual budget submitted to Polk County before the end of March. To give you a better idea of city finances, you have to really talk about funds. What these are a grouping of related accounts so that we can really maintain control over resources that come in and be able to segregate the detail to be able to report that information eventually on a comprehensive annual financial report that gets audited every year. And what we try to do in these is try to keep together those similar accounts and try and work through the best way to display those and present those to the council and the citizens at large. Some of those fund structures will kind of go through certain particular funds. General fund is one that we primarily talk about during the budget because it is the main operating fund of the general fund. That's where you're seeing a lot of the public safety, administrative services, IT, different things like that, where we will be the main process of running the city. The other group of funds that you guys see with the capital projects are those that we do over a series of the next 5 to 6 years. What those are account for acquisitions and or construction of major assets and infrastructure. Example of some of those acquisitions are fire apparatus, ambulances, and road construction, stormwater, and sanitary sewer projects, to name a few. Enterprise funds are very much like businesses. They're supposed to be self-supporting in a way that the user fees are meant to support and pay for those services. There is a exception to that rule when it comes to public housing. That one is subsidized from federal government and HUD. Some of the enterprise funds that we have here at the city are parking, sanitary sewer, storm water, solid waste, and the golf fund. Special revenue accounts for special revenue funds account for proceeds that are for a very specific source and can only be spent a certain way. A great example of that is the local option sales tax that just got passed in 2019. That is a specific revenue stream that the city received that can only be spent a certain way. I'll go into a little bit more details with the local option sales tax. We had that detailed report that was presented to the council back in August, but I wanted to kind of highlight those numbers again for this group as well. An internal service fund are very similar to the enterprise funds. Those internal services are very much like a business, but those clients are those departments and divisions within the other accounts, within the other part of the city. So a good example of that internal service fund is our fleet division. So they purchase and repair and fuel the vehicles across the entire city, whether it's in the general fund or the enterprise account, that actually serves the rest of the city. The last fund that I want to talk about today is our debt service fund. That accounts for all of the principal and interest payments that the city does on our general obligation debt. General obligation debt is a debt that the city pays with a debt service levy based off of bonds that we've issued to pay for CIP projects, mainly those tax-supported ones of streets and parks and different projects like that. Those debt service payments vary over time. Usually we have it going over a 20-year time frame, that those expenditures for principal and interest are to reflect the amount of useful life that we get from those projects that we're actually paying for in that particular year. So it reflects spending those dollars for the benefit of those purchases of assets or building of the infrastructure. Budget forecasting and process. This was a slide that I think is very well covered in one of the slides, but again, I wanted it kind of more in a text basis for review for everybody. And again, it's just the city manager works with the directors to determine some of the council strategic plans, and then we work through that budget process and we compile the salary projections and review those line item expenditures and projected revenues. And then we kind of work through that process that kind of correlates to the time frame that I kind of covered at the beginning of this PowerPoint, that is for that 2022. One thing I wanted to highlight for the general fund, which is our primary operating fund, is kind of talk about the revenue sources that the general fund sees. As you can see from this slide, the largest percentage is property taxes. The next biggest is fees and charges for service. Those include things like users fees for programs, CIP charges, pilot reimbursement for services, ambulance charges, and different things like that. As you go through these, you can see that something like the franchise fee, that is the 7%. That is based off of the usage of gas and electric from Mid-American, that 5% that's on those bills. The hotel motel tax is kind of a unique situation. That hotel motel tax, we have an agreement that we actually keep only 3/7 of that revenue. The other 4/7 go to CVB and Bravo. And we also have some funding that goes to the zoo through that 4% that goes through those entities. Some of the other taxes other taxes, like I said, were the utility franchise and those hotel motel. The intergovernmental are federal grants, local grants, and state grants. This dollar represents a dollar that our residents paid in fiscal year 2021. As you can see, it's made up of all different compartments. You kind of saw that on the pie graph. This is just a different representation, kind of showing a little bit more detail of how that breakout of the pie works. From that city portion of 35 cents of the dollar, we have that broken up into a couple of different levies. We've got the regular general levy, liability, property and self-insurance, and those two are ones that actually go into the general fund for general operations. The employee benefits levy is one of those special revenue funds, so that can only be spent on employee benefits. Now, the debt service levy is the main source of revenue that goes into the debt service fund to pay those principal and interest payments on those projects that we pay for with the GO bonds being issued each year in the capital improvement plan. I wanted to kind of highlight this example of property taxes. So this can kind of show you the difference in FY21 if you're looking at a house at either 100,000 or 150,000. That's that 100% assessed value. That's the value that is determined at the county level, that they have regulations that they have to follow by the state. From there, the state determines what's called a rollback factor. And what they do there is basically say, you're not taxed at 100% of what your assessed value is. And so within the fiscal year 2021 rollback, it was basically about 55% of your assessed value was actually taxed. So when you actually come across that, you're actually taxed at that $55,000 level at the $100,000 assessed value. When you divide that by 1,000 and times that by the tax rate that the city has, or that are the combined rate, gets you your annual tax bill. That's where it was just under $2,600. Of that, though, only $915 is from the city of Des Moines for that $100,000 assessed value house. That equates out to $76 a month that goes to the city. And that just kind of shows you that change in that 50,000 from the 100 to 150,000. To kind of hit another topic that we discussed a little bit more in depth, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the local option timeline. That local option sales tax and service vote passed with a 70% approval back in March of 2019. Just 2 days later, the council approved a 60-cent property tax rate for fiscal year 2020. We also saw an additional decrease in our fiscal year 2021 of another 3 cents. July 2019 was the first of when that local option started to be collected from our businesses within Des Moines. August 2019, the state basically took an estimate for what they thought the local option sales tax would generate for the city. They actually take that estimate and actually start paying their estimate at 95% of what they think will actually be collected over the course of the fiscal year. Those payments come in starting in August, And because fiscal year 2020 was the first year that we had local option sales tax, we only actually received 11 payments within the fiscal year through June 30th, 2020. February 2020, what the state does is then goes back and looks at what was being collected and then reforecasts the last part of the payments. So back in February in 2020, the state basically looked at their estimate and actually lowered what they thought the city of Des Moines was actually going to receive for the entire fiscal year 2020. August 2020 is when we actually came and put together the report for the council to kind of detail the numbers that you're seeing in this slides right now, to kind of make sure that the council and the citizens are able to see what we spend this local option sales tax on. November 2020, what the state does is then looks over the entire fiscal year through June 30 as to what we actually collected in local option sales tax. When they do that reconciliation, it can be where they overpaid us or underpaid us. And what ends up happening is, because they retained that 5% of what they thought we were going to collect, usually there's a reconciliation on where it could possibly end up. What we actually received in November of 2020 was an additional $200,000 based off of what they paid us, which basically equates to our 2020 ended up being 5% lower than what the state anticipated for our fiscal year 2020 of sales tax. From the local option, the use of funds, kind of breaking it down here in a pie graph, you can see that we had 50% on the property tax relief, and then it breaks out in a bunch of the different categories. We had this on the video, but basically what we try to do here is just have this all this information in one place. This next slide kind of breaks out the actual dollar amounts for that property tax relief. So property tax relief was that $19,060,857. That was an amount that was transferred to the debt service fund to allow for that 60-cent drop in our debt service levy. The other part of this was the Neighborhood Development Corp. We have a agreement with them for work that they're doing, and that was actually part of the designated reserve amount that you saw on that pie graph as well. The street improvements and flood prevention, the street improvements got $5 million within the 2020 fiscal year. Those projects kind of spread across most of the city, but there was 3 large projects within that $5 million. We had Hartford Avenue, that was from Southeast 22nd Street to the soccer complex. There was also Hubble Avenue rehabilitation from East 18th Street to Easton Boulevard, and the Martin Luther King Jr. Parkway rehabilitation from Hickman to Euclid. Those were the 3 major projects, as well as there was a couple other ones that was in the design phase during fiscal year 2020, and a bunch of smaller residential streets saw improvements as well. You can actually get the full detail of those projects from our local option sales tax report from the city's website at dsm.city. The stormwater improvements was $550,000. What that was half of the cost for a citywide study to basically look at all those projects that need to be done for the citywide. What that is we basically are working through our consultant to get through what is our priorities going forward and how are we going to approach those. Kind of related to that, we also have part of our designated reserve is this flood prevention property buyouts of $400,000. These properties are those in a floodplain that are in a floodplain. We have currently roughly about 230 homes citywide. 62 of those are in the 4 mile, and to purchase all of them is estimated at about $35 million. So this is, as those properties come available, we're trying to purchase those in conjunction with federal funds if we can get those in there as well to leverage to get these properties out of the floodplain and out of harm's way. through our neighborhood improvements on local option sales tax, we also had Blitz on Blight. We have a very interactive website on dsm.city that kind of talks about those houses that have been demolished and which ones are through the different processes. We also, in addition to the $700,000 that we did on local option sales tax, we also issued some bonds for additional funds to be able to do additional tear downs of those houses. This next area is the special investment districts. That is our Invest DSM cooperation that we have with the county, and they work through trying to support the city neighborhood revitalization program, and they focused on 4 major areas within the city. The next area is the neighborhood matching grant. That one we're waiting to kind of work through some of the processes that Invest DSM did to kind of work on how we're going to put forth that neighborhood matching grant. We have $100,000 in that designated reserve, and we're going to be using that over the course of the next fiscal year. Another major part that's supposed to help the neighborhood improvements is the expanded library hours. And with that, we tried to adjust for the COVID effect on those library hours that had to be closed because of the pandemic. So that was a little bit less than what we anticipated on spending on that, but we wanted to adjust because they were actually closed for a duration of time during the COVID pandemic. The next section is the public safety improvements and expenditures. We have 2 different topics here. We've got firefighter positions. That is for 13 roughly 13 firefighter positions that were funded by a SAFER grant that ended last fiscal year. And this was to continue those, as well as make sure we have enough positions for the new fire station that was coming online on the northeast of the city. The other part of this is the mobile mental health crisis service grant. We've been working with partners on this, and we've basically had this $200,000 as a designated reserve when we can actually administer that grant going forward. As I just stated before, you saw some of that information on those designated reserves. Those different pieces on those prior slides accumulate to that 1.5. The financial reserve that we have there is about $7 million. What we're trying to do there is we're trying to match our other fund policies of trying to make it so that if the revenues go down in any particular year, it won't affect what services we're trying to provide. So we're trying to make sure we're being fiscally responsible and can account for things going up and down in the market. This next slide kind of talks about where we spend our money in the general fund. As you can see, the largest portion is the personnel services. That's both the salary and benefits of the general fund. And then it goes down further from contractual services, commodities, capital outlay. The 3 largest items from the contractual services is those payment of that hotel motel tax out there, vehicle replacement, and GATSO costs. This next slide you've seen before kind of was that breakdown of the general fund by department, and it kind of shows again that public safety is the biggest representation of our general fund budget, with 62% between our police and fire departments. And you can see that the rest of this kind of deals with just the general fund. Most of the other public works funds and some other costs within special revenue is represented there, but the general fund is that primary operation account for the city. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Scott.
All right, thank you, Nick. I see that we have quite a few questions coming in yet tonight, and this is great. Keep those coming. Some of the topics that look like are being covered include bike lanes, additional questions on sidewalks, and even about a neighborhood coordinator position being created. These are all great questions. Please do keep those coming. We'll get right to those in a minute, but I do want to cover the topic that we seem to be getting an awful lot of questions about, especially on our website previously. And so we've had probably over 24 emails asking specifically about our public safety budgets, specifically our police department. So I think it'd be appropriate that I address some of these questions. And this is just a sampling, but we have received questions from LaShawn Winfield, Luke Bescom, Bridget Peterson, Adam Callahan, and many others. So I'm going to try and address these in groupings if I can. Then questions include, why does the police department budget take up such a significant portion of the general operating budget? Great question. And can't some of these funds be better used elsewhere, specifically for maybe mental health services or assistance to those who may be experiencing homelessness? Another grouping deal with the SRO program, that is the School Resource Officer Program, for which we do have police officers within the Des Moines public schools, high schools and junior high. So these are all valid questions. Let me try and address as many of these as I can at this point. And again, we will continue to put answers out on the website throughout our budgeting process. First and foremost, public safety is the most important service that we provide to our citizens in Des Moines. You've heard us talk about the sheer numbers that we deal with within public safety. We have over 200,000 calls annually that the police need to work on. And those include a wide range of responsibilities. You're talking about over 12,000 traffic violations, robberies, anywhere between 200 and 300. And yes, in Des Moines, we have between 15 and 20 homicides, typically in a year, that obviously need to be investigated. So yes, our police department does take up a large portion of our, budget. Of the police budget, 85% is associated with the salary and benefits. It is a people-oriented service. Police and fire have enhanced bargaining ability through the state laws, and the city has no control over the pension aspect of the budget. That is something that the state manages, and we as a city employer simply need to contribute to the pensions and the retirement funds of our police and fire officers. So again, that is out of our control. When we compare ourselves to other communities, especially in the Midwest, our percentage of our budget going towards public safety is very similar to these others. We often compare ourselves to other capital cities such as Madison. We also look at St. Paul, Grand Rapids, and Omaha is very comparable. To ensure that we have increased accountability, the city is committing another $1 million of sales tax towards replacing the body cameras that our police officers use. That new technology will have better battery capacity and make sure that all of the activities of our police are recorded properly. The city has begun working with other nonprofit groups across the country to try and reduce crime and violence. In one case, we are pursuing the possibility of having a Cure Violence membership here in Des Moines as well. That will involve an awful lot of our nonprofit partners. The city has started a process of an internal equity study. We have a review committee made up of many of our citizens that will be looking at police policies from an equity lens, making sure that we are providing law enforcement in an equitable way with good data to be shown and reported on annually. We have a recruitment class that was just chosen at our police department just back in November, and that will be the most diverse class in the department's history when looking at gender and race. So we're very proud of that, and we are moving in the right trend there. The police department and the city manager's office are reviewing our 911 calls. We're looking for opportunities for our community partners to step up and actually respond to some of these calls instead of having police officers answer all of these. Think of things like well-being checks and mental health crisis situations where we could really use the help of some of our partners in the nonprofit and medical industries. The city has committed local option sales tax funds to be used in our mobile crisis unit expansion. We have a very successful program, but we do need to expand that into 24/7 and we need to expand it into more youth response as well, which do have different skill sets necessary when dealing with mental health in our youth. Excuse me, the decision on how to proceed with SROs mentioned before, these are our school resource officers. That discussion goes on with the Des Moines Public Schools. It is our understanding that they are asking for guidance and recommendations from their staff and their students. So that conversation will continue and make those decisions in the next several months. All right, so again, we've gotten quite a few questions from the public. I want to keep those going. We've got great questions. I got another one here from Vanessa, who lives in the Merle Hay neighborhood and regularly addresses our city council. Vanessa, thank you for your questions. Actually, there's quite a few, so give me just a second. I want to answer several of these if I could. She's talking about allocations to our neighborhood-based service delivery program through our police department. And the question is, what exactly does the program offer to our community? So NBSD, Neighborhood-Based Service Delivery, is an active liaison program connecting our residents and our police department. And instead of calling the police department directly for issues that may need assistance and focused for a resolution, they simply need to call their NBSD officer that is assigned to their area. We have 54 recognized neighborhoods in Des Moines, and we are broken up into 10 different demographic sectors across the city. And so our officers are covering several different neighborhood associations. But the nice thing about our neighborhood-based service delivery program is that allows our neighborhood leaders to deal with the same police officer and actually develop a relationship with that officer so that information can flow easily. And if there's any need for additional attention from a neighborhood association on trends that are showing up, that relationship has already been built and that communication can flow easily. Another question from Vanessa was, who do the 5 sergeants and 9 senior police officers and lieutenant work with within the communities? And the answer there is the neighborhood association leaders. Mostly those are just the residents who have determined their own leadership roles within their associations. The officers will often attend those regular neighborhood association meetings and again, report on any crime activities within their neighborhood and talk through any safety issues. It's also an opportunity to share information at those neighborhood associations with other non-law enforcement issues. And so those are very good opportunities for our public to become involved. I would strongly encourage involvement of our neighborhood associations. Another one of Vanessa's questions was, do these neighborhoods actually want the programs? I will tell you, in my conversation with the neighbor leaders, they absolutely want that access directly to the same officer. So again, they can build that relationship and get to quick answers that they may need when something is occurring within their own neighborhoods. Is there any data that shows the pros and cons of having this program within the city? And I'd say the closest thing we have to that is the responses that we get from our citizen surveys. We at Des Moines conduct citizen surveys every 2 years. We just finished one of those up and reported back to the council and the public on those results a couple months ago. That report is also available on our city's webpage that will have all the results of those citizen surveys. They look very strong in the area of police performance as well. Looks like I'm getting some more questions, which is great. Keep these flowing. Let's see, which one will I go to next? We've got a couple here. I want to go to Chelsea's if I could real quick. Chelsea has asked that last she had heard there would be a position that would be added to as a neighborhood coordinator to the help improve residents' experiences with community development efforts. Is this still planned? Yes, Chelsea, we have created a new job title as liaison here at the city. And there's kind of 2 areas that we're looking to use those positions. More generally, as we have planning efforts across the city and communicating with the public and how our land use and zoning issues are affecting our residents. But then we also have property improvement programs that we will be introducing in the spring and into next summer. And those will involve the needed improvements to some private property. And we want to make sure that we're communicating those new standards to our neighborhoods. And the way to best do that is have this liaison position and several of them available to the public, working through any resources that may be available to our residents as we require the minimum standards on property maintenance. Great question, Chelsea. And actually, we have a different Chelsea that's asked a question and asked what neighborhoods are being prioritized for the sidewalk projects. And so we talked a little bit about the neighborhood sidewalk program. I'm going to refer to Steve Neighbor here, and if we can get him on as well. But it is a citywide effort. Steve, you want to talk a little bit about how this is citywide? And you have some maps, if you do, on our website that our residents will be able to look at?
So Scott, yeah, you're correct. It is a citywide program. As you mentioned, we've got in Move DSM, we've got really about a total of, we got well over 600 miles of sidewalk gaps in our city. And through the planning efforts of Move DSM, we identified 180 miles of priority, we call priority 1 gaps. And those are gaps that have close proximity to schools, bus stops, commercial nodes, and also provide long connectivity along major corridors. And so really that's the focus. As you mentioned, you said it best, it's a citywide effort. We've installed in the past 2 capital improvement projects, sidewalk projects that have been done over the past year, sidewalks over 7.5 miles, over 40,000 linear feet of sidewalks all over the city. And there are certainly sections of our city that have more need than others. For example, the recent program that just was authorized by council tends to focus around the gaps around Howe Elementary, where there are no sidewalks or very little sidewalks at all around Howe Elementary. So again, there's not really an effort prioritizing certain neighborhoods. It's all over the city, with the focus starting on proximity to schools, proximity to commercial nodes, proximity to bus stops, as well as providing some connectivity in those long corridors. So thank you, Scott. I hope that answers or helps.
Thank you, Steve. I think that does do a good job. But while I've got you here, Steve, if you could stay on for me, I do have another question. This one comes from Scott Bentz, and it deals with kind of our projects with potential bike paths and bike lanes. It says that if there are any funding shortfalls for street projects, they should be taken out of any of the proposed road widening projects and put towards sidewalks, possible bike infrastructure and transit. I think we are in the process of doing that with a project last night that was approved with the council. Steve, if you wanted to give that as an example of how we actually don't have too many widening projects in our CIP, but rather we find ourselves shrinking the roadways?
That's correct, Scott. Absolutely. I think I'm not really aware of any actual widening projects where we're adding traffic lanes. In fact, we've been more doing what's known as road diets. Our city, we have had a number of existing four-lane undivided highways, and those 4-lane undivided highways can present challenges. One, they could present speeding issues, allowing kind of traffic to weave and speed through our neighborhoods. They also tend to have higher crash histories. And so we've done a number of road diets, particularly along University Avenue. Last night, our city council also authorized to move forward with Ingersoll Avenue between 42nd Street and Polk Boulevard. I think folks are pretty aware of the work that's been done on Ingersoll Avenue to the east, down near Martin Luther King Jr. Parkway. But this section between 42nd and Polk will be reducing the pavement width from Currently, it's a 61-foot wide asphalt pavement, and we'll be reducing that down to less than 50 feet. And actually, really, the asphalt portion will be 22 feet wide, just providing 2 lanes in each direction. Again, our ultimate goals when we look at the city's with the city's complete streets policy, and as well as our planning efforts in Move DSM, is to provide a transportation network that's safe for all users, motorists, bicyclists, pedestrians, and transit users. And you know, sometimes that goal doesn't necessarily mean how can we get from point A to point B the fastest. And that's when we say the safest for all users. Sometimes that does involve actually slowing the motorist traffic down in many cases, especially through our neighborhoods. And so we're very proud of the progress our city has made and will continue to make in making all our streets safer for all users.
Okay. Thank you again with that detail, Steve. Appreciate it. A lot of that is, quite frankly, a need for patience, because those projects do take time with all the design that's necessary and then the public input that comes about with that. So I appreciate the diligence and the questions that come through. I've got a couple more. I was going to jump to Nick, but I want to actually address this one here. The question is, why is the Civil and Human Rights Department so poorly funded? Seems to be an odd reflection of priorities. Another great question. I want to address these head on. And so the Human Rights Department is doing fabulous work within our community. Many of you are probably very well familiar with our Bridging the Gap work that our commission has taken a huge leadership role with the assistance of staff, both Joshua Barr and Manisha. And so what we have decided to do is expand those efforts. And so we are bringing equity into the city manager's office and bringing Manisha over here to expand those efforts. Again, aspects of the Bridging the Gap, but also reviewing our city services. We have an equitable services team that now has finished up a second year of reviewing our city policies and service levels. And so we have a lot of work yet to go with that team and others. But understand that the city has, similar to another question that was just asked, our value system is such that we focus on 3 different lenses. We've always looked at the fiscal aspect of budgets and policies, but we are also looking at the environmental impacts, which is like the resiliency. You hear us talking about our clean energy goals, and that's the second lens. The third lens is social equity. And so we are going to grow our resources towards social equity with the help of Manisha here in the city manager's office, but we are also going to expand the resources at our civil and human rights staffing level. And I'll tell you that the involvement that the commissioners themselves take on is fabulous. That's something the city has not had before. And so their value, they are adding an incredible amount of value as well. So I want to make it very well known that we are increasing resources in that area and will continue to do so. So I appreciate being able to do that. Now let's try and get back on schedule here. I think we've got some more infrastructure to talk about, maybe some stormwater, Nick, and maybe even bring Jonathan Gano, our Public Works Director, into the conversation.
Yep. Thanks, Scott, for handing that back over. Let me get my screen back up. So we're going to actually go into some of our capital projects. It's very large dollar amounts that we were looking at here for capital projects. As it relates to the last capital improvement plan, our breakout of our CIP expenditures in the CIP plan is shown on a screen right now. Our biggest percentage obviously is our streets. The next is our stormwater and our sewer system, which it consists of both the stormwater and sanitary sewer side. You kind of see the breakout of those other projects, but in recent time, we've been definitely focusing a lot more on the stormwater with the push from the council, and we've had numerous groups discussing our CIP infrastructure plans for our stormwater and different things like that. So as you look at our capital project funds, this kind of gives you a history of kind of the last, this was in our last capital improvement plan. It had 5 years of history ending at 2019, and then it showed our budget for 20 and are anticipated through 2026. As you can see, this is tax supported and enterprise. The blue line kind of represents the tax supported projects, which is your streets, parks, and different things like that. Those enterprise ones is the difference between the blue and the red. And the biggest chunks of those are our sanitary sewer and storm sewers. With that, I would like to kind of bring in our Public Works Director, Jonathan Gano, to kind of talk a little bit more about what they're seeing from Public Works and the focus that we have on our sewer systems.
Thanks, Nick. I'll add that we have three very large drivers of capital projects in the sanitary and storm sewer parts of the budget, and they're all aimed at protecting health, safety, and the environment. We're coming to the end of a very large and very expensive undertaking that was required to eliminate what's called combined sewer overflows, where stormwater would enter the sanitary sewer and fill it up, and then it would overpressurize and just discharge raw sewage into the rivers. Thankfully, we're approaching the very end of a $300 million worth of work, both at the wastewater treatment plant and throughout neighborhoods and the main systems that carry sewage through the urban area. In the very earliest days of city building in the United States, a way to economize on infrastructure was to send all the water into one pipe and just send it to the river. In intervening decades, let's say 50 to 75 years ago, we started building treatment plants to treat that water before it was discharged into the river to clean it up a little bit. But those pipes upstream from that wastewater treatment plant were never upsized. So they're still sized for carrying a typical rainstorm, and a couple times a year, a typical rainstorm will overwhelm that and discharge raw sewage right into the river. That's a bad thing. So we've been working cooperatively with the EPA to fix that. We're coming to the end of that cycle. The next major driver in facing the storm sewer system is the levee system alongside the rivers. As our climate is changing, we're finding that flood control structures designed in the 50s and built in the 1960s are no longer adequate and don't offer the same level of protection as they were originally intended to. There's a lot of people and a lot of property behind those levees, so significant portions of downtown and the neighborhoods on the east side of the river, and the low-lying areas and industrial areas that run all along the Des Moines River all the way to the city limits out near Pleasant Hill. So about $111 million of work aimed at upgrading and improving the levee system to build our resiliency to a changing climate in our urban core right here alongside the rivers. And the third major driver of storm sewer, storm and sanitary costs are flood protections inside the neighborhoods. We saw in the giant rainstorm of 2018 that delivered 8 to 10 inches of rain across the in places across the metro area, that we saw flooding in places where we would historically have never seen flooding, at the top of the hill even, usually the place that's deemed the safest from flowing water. So recognizing that these storm sewers were built in the 1930s, 1940s or so, even if they are separate storm sewers, not combined like we find in the oldest parts of town, they're not adequate to manage the big peaks of new rainwater that are showing up because of these changes in the climate. So an enormous surge of work coming to address neighborhood scale flooding to get people out of the floodplain when they're sometimes 20, 30, or 40 blocks away from the river. we usually think of flooding as the big floods of 93 and 2008 and 2010, where the Raccoon River and the Des Moines River both crested and had levee failures and washed out low-lying neighborhoods. But now we're even seeing interior flooding inside and away from the rivers where we would traditionally expect to see that. So a large expense in upgrading the old infrastructure built 75 to 100 years ago to handle the challenges of the next 100 years.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, for that explanation. I think we're running out of time here, so I'm going to try and address two more questions if we could. Let's see. Steve, this one's going to come back to you. I think this will be the last one for the evening for you, but we've got a question from Christopher, and it is, what is the proposed timeline for the city's plan to alter Grand Avenue at 18th Street and Fleur Drive intersection? Specifically, you'd like to know if it has already been approved and what the estimated cost is. Steve?
Sure, thank you, Scott. This project, the 18th, this in response to kind of off of what Jonathan talked about, the city's been in coordination with the Wastewater Reclamation Authority in addressing eliminating the combined sewer overflows. And so part of that, one of the final phases, as Jonathan said, we're getting near to the finish line here. The final phases is the Wastewater Reclamation Authority is running a very large storm sewer, almost 6 foot in diameter, in the area of Locust Street, Grand Avenue, and 18th Street, starting in 2022, really with the bulk of it being in 2023. So when we run a large sewer through an area in our streets, this gives us an opportunity to take a look at our streets and say, hey, what should we put back in terms of streets? So our traffic folks have done some analysis, and if you're familiar with that, it's kind of some atypical intersections, to say the least, at Grand Avenue and 18th and Locust and Fleur. It all come together there. We need to keep in mind that since those intersections were built, the Martin Luther King Jr. Parkway was constructed. So we've determined that there is definitely excess capacity and excess roadway pavement in that area. And so, to be honest, we'd like to reallocate some of that space. For example, the Fleur Drive Bridge is currently 4 lanes wide, and our recommendation will be to narrow that down so we can provide wider pedestrian and bicycle facilities across the bridge, as well as reconfigure the roadways in that area to provide a better pedestrian and bicycle experience than it is today. And it's an obscure intersection to address that. So the construction of that work would coincide with the sewer project. It's anticipated to begin in late 2022 with the majority of the work in 2023. The bridge work would probably happen in 2025, and that's the city. The question about cost, the bridge work itself is about $3 million. However, the city is working to secure about $2 million in federal funding, federal surface transportation block grant funding, to help pay for that work to rehab the bridge. Where the roadway improvements, and again, the roadway improvements alone are about $3 million in that vicinity. And again, that's a preliminary estimate. That does not include, that's separate from the Wastewater Reclamation Authority's sewer work. Really, this is projects just in concept stage. We just had a public meeting about that, so we would be looking at starting design in 2021, and so it's not approved. It's not. We're not at a. We have not done detailed design yet, but it certainly will be moving into design next year. So, and I would like to encourage folks to check out, if they have questions about specific capital improvement projects, to check out the city's website, dsm.city. It's dsm.city. Right on the main page, there's a link to something called Projects Map. And that Projects Map, you can type in your address and zoom in. You'll find a GIS type map where you can kind of learn about what a project is. And as well, there's that location, and also under the engineering department's webpage, under projects and studies, there are links to specific, more detailed, larger scale projects as well. So check out our website, please, dsm.city. Thank you. I hope that answers the question on the timeline and the cost.
All right. Thank you once again, Steve. So I do have time for one more question. I think this is appropriate to end with this question from Emily. The question is, what are the city's values? What do you want our values to be? And how can we align the budget to support the community, to provide for the most vulnerable, to increase in housing resources and shelter support for those without shelter or in danger of eviction? I think that's a great question. I touched on it a little bit when I talked about the three lenses that we use here at the city. But I think it's important to take a moment and recognize that as a city manager, and we've heard from the mayor tonight and our council, we are responsible for the city government functions that we perform. But there are other levels of government that participate in providing services to our community as well. So we don't exactly have all the authority and opportunity to address every issue, albeit we take leadership roles. You'll recall that it was our mayor that put in place a proclamation with a mask mandate before any of the others. And so there's a strong commitment across the board for safety and well-being of our residents. You've heard that again and again from our mayor. And yet we still need other levels of governments to participate in those efforts. So when we talk about a value system, absolutely things like housing become crucial. And so you will see in our budget that we do spend millions of city funds towards housing projects. And we do have public housing, as well as a incredibly large Section 8 program that we manage for the entire county here at Des Moines. So we have a strong commitment to housing that includes support for our homeless shelter downtown, and the continuation of that service and needs for expansion as well, which they're in expanding mode right now. So we do address as many needs as we can. We've talked a little bit tonight about local option sales tax assisting with the mobile crisis unit, mental health. Those things are, again, efforts that we will always have city leadership involved, but we do need to reach out to the broader community, whether that be other levels of government or even nonprofits, our hospital systems. The only way to solve these community-wide concerns is that we engage the full community. And so I would implore those that may be listening from other entities to join us in those efforts and to provide the resources that we do need to accomplish these goals in those areas. So I really appreciate that question as well, Emily. It looks like we've run out of time. So I guess this is a point where I want to thank Nick, our finance director, Steve, for being able to answer those questions, as well as our public works director, Jonathan Gano. Again, I want to call out the leadership that our mayor has put forward and our city council. We have some very important work ahead of us. I see that there's questions that are continuing. Please keep those flowing at our website. Again, that's dsm.city/budget, where you can provide this additional input to us. As residents, your investment in time, involvement, and commitment is what makes the city of Des Moines a better place to live and work. So I thank you for your efforts there and your involvement. If you need additional information, you can also call the city manager's office, and again, reference our website. So tonight, I want to say thank you and have a great holiday season. Appreciate it.